Hello and welcome to the second lecture for topic 1. And in this lecture, we're going to be taking a look at the informal criminal justice process. In the last lecture, we looked at the formal criminal justice process. And in this lecture, we're going to be taking a look at the informal criminal justice process. So as we learned in the last lecture, that many see the criminal justice process as an assembly line, offenders going through a series of steps, and that there's this sense that they go through all the steps. Well, as we know from reading in the textbook, that this rarely happens, that there is a funneling out of cases and offenders, and very few make it to the bottom of the funnel. And there's two main reasons for why this funneling takes place. One is the courtroom work group, and the other is what is known as the criminal justice wedding cake, or the wedding cake model of justice. So let's go ahead and take a look first at the criminal justice funnel, and then we'll take a look at the impact that the courtroom work group and the wedding cake model of justice have on that funneling effect. Okay, so this is a visual representation of the criminal justice funnel. And this is based on the work of Thomas Cohen and Tracy Kicklecon. They wrote a paper called Felony Defendants in Large Urban Counties. And basically they looked at Bureau of Justice statistics, and they asked themselves, of the 1,000 cases of serious crimes that are committed, what happens to them in the United States criminal justice system? And so of the 1,000 serious crimes that are committed in the United States, half of them are never reported to police, okay? And so 500 of them are not reported, 500 of them are reported to the police. Of those 500 cases that are reported to police, only 100 of them are so-called cleared. That is where police actually identify a perpetrator of the crime. The vast majority of cases, and in this 400 out of the 500, they never, so about 20%, or 80%, only 20% are cleared, that a perpetrator is never identified. Of those 100% that are where a perpetrator is identified, 35 of them are juvenile offenders and 65 are adult offenders. And here we're focusing on the adult offenders. Of the 65 adult offenders, only 40 of those are actually charged with the crime. In the other 25 cases, the prosecutor decides to exercise their discretion, and they decide not to continue to pursue the case, and that's about 30% of the cases. Of those 40, 10 never show back up in court. They jump bail. And so of the 40, 30 are actually arraigned and made aware of what their charges are. Of the 30 who are charged, very few decide to go to trial. 27 decide to plead guilty. A total of 3 go to trial. Of those 3, 2/3 of them are found guilty. 1/3 is acquitted. And then of those who are found guilty or plead guilty, 29 of them, 20 end up in some sort of secure confinement, and the other 9 are on probation. So the funnel, we start big and we end up very small. Now, before we go and take a look at the factors that contribute to the funneling, let's just think critically about the criminal justice funnel that we just talked about. So when you looked at that funnel, and you might even want to just take a pause on the video and ask yourself, like get out a piece of paper and sort of ask yourself, like when you think of all the places where the narrowing takes place, which is most concerning for you? Or which do you think is most concerning in terms of the criminal justice in the United States, or in terms of law and order in the United States, keeping the United States safe? And so, okay, go ahead and pause the video recording, think about it, and then come back and you can tell me what you wrote down. Well, you won't be able to do that, but we can talk about some things. Hey, welcome back. So what did you find most concerning? I think one of the things I find concerning, maybe, is the low level of crimes that are reported to police. When you think about 1,000 serious crimes that are committed, only half of them are reported to police. And I guess we have to ask ourselves, like, why is that, right? I mean, if the reason people don't report crimes to the police is because they think, this is serious, but it's not that big of a deal, and I don't want the criminal justice system to get involved. I mean, I guess that's kind of a legitimate reason, right? I mean, I live in River West, and, we've had things stolen out of our backyard. And, when we first moved here, we would report it to police. They were never able to, they came over, made a report. It took a lot of time, but the items were never recovered, and they really weren't that big of a deal, the items that were stolen. So sometimes when something happens, we don't call the police now that we live here for a while. And that's kind of our choice, right? We're sort of like, hey, this wasn't that serious. On the other hand, if people aren't reporting police crimes to police because they don't trust the police, or because they maybe feel like they're going to get in trouble if they report stuff to the police, well, then that might be more of a concern, right? If people are just like have such a low level of trust in the police that they actually think that they do more harm than good, or this sense that if you talk to the police, you yourself might end up getting in trouble, that I think is somewhat concerning. What about the low clearance rates? And so, as I stated, about 20% of serious crimes are cleared. And that doesn't mean that like somebody goes to trial and is found like acquitted, not guilty. That's not what cleared means. Cleared just simply means that the law enforcement identifies somebody who they think is the perpetrator of that crime, and then they send that person over to the prosecutor's office, and the prosecutor decides whether they want to charge that person with a crime. That's what the clearance of a crime is. We have a relatively low clearance rate in the United States. Is that a cause for concern? Next class period, we're going to be talking about the crime control model. And the crime control model is sort of like, you want to make sure that if you want people not to commit crimes, they have to have a certain level of certainty that they're going to get caught. Well, gosh darn it, if I'm a, sort of a rational actor and I say, only 20% of serious crimes get cleared, I might say, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to roll the dice. I'm going to steal that bike, or I'm going to steal that car. I'm going to break into somebody's house, right? Because, hey, what are the chances of me getting caught? And so that can sort of have an implication on criminal justice and safety in the United States. Also, I wanted to bring up the concept of prosecutorial discretion. As we know, prosecutors, like law enforcement, have the discretion about whether or not they want to charge somebody with a crime. And, as we saw in the funnel, about 30% of people who are turned over from law enforcement to prosecutor decides for whatever reason they don't want to pursue that. That has a term that your textbook talks about called pronounced noli prosequi. It basically means that we are not going to prosecute. Okay, and is that a cause for concern? I mean, in a way, we would waste time in our criminal justice system if every crime was prosecuted, right? Because you might not have the evidence to actually sustain that charge once you get to trial. But if prosecutors are not charging people for maybe not great reasons, such as political reasons, etc., something to be concerned about. And then finally, the high percentage of plea bargains, right? 90% of cases plea out. Very few go to trial. Well, is that because the people are actually guilty and they're like, you know what, I'll take the lower charge, because a lot of times plea bargaining includes a lower charging offense. The prosecutor will drop a serious charge and go lower in order to encourage somebody to plea. Well, if you're guilty, and then you're like, what I'll take the lower offense and I'll still do some time, right? That might be a beneficial thing. But if people who aren't guilty are pleading guilty because they don't trust the trial court system, that's probably a greater cause for concern. So as we mentioned, there are two factors that contribute to the funneling in the criminal justice system. And they're the courtroom work group and the wedding cake model of justice. So let's take a moment to dig into both of those in a little bit more detail. I think a lot of times when we think about what goes on in a courtroom, we think about some of the movies that we've seen over the years. And, that's an image from the really great movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, but A Few Good Men, right? It's in any courtroom drama you see in a movie, it's sort of like this vigorous adversarial process between the prosecutor and the defense attorney, and it's really like sort of fireworks that takes place. That portrayal is much more fiction than it is fact. Oftentimes that the criminal justice system and in the courtroom in particular is sort of seen as this adversarial process, like what is portrayed in the movie A Few Good Men. But when you really look at the facts of what takes place in the courtroom and the courtroom work group, it's much more cooperative than it is adversarial. So what really goes on in the courtroom is a much more of a cooperative endeavor. The reality is that the process is oftentimes more cooperative and not adversarial. And you'll really sort of see that when you do your courtroom report. You're not going to see the Tom Cruises of the world or the, whatever lawyer of your choice is, who stands up and is like making a loud speech about justice, right? Not that they're not passionate, but the image you see up there is much more likely what you're going to see in a courtroom. And so the reality is the process is often cooperative, not adversarial. And that the members who work in the courtroom, they generally share goals on getting an offender through the process as quickly as possible. So let's talk about what is the courtroom work group and what are some of the shared values that the courtroom work group holds, and how does that contribute to the funneling that we see in the criminal justice system. So what is the courtroom work group? Well, the courtroom work group, as the title suggests, are the people that work in the courtroom. And that, it's composed of the judge, the prosecutor, the defense attorney. Those are the main players in the courtroom work group. But it also includes others who work in the courtroom too. The bailiff, the court reporter, the court clerk, etc. But mainly the courtroom work group is the judge, prosecutor, and defense attorney. And oftentimes those three people, they have, like any group in society, right, that they form sort of shared norms or shared expectations for how people should behave in that courtroom. In the courtroom work group, one of the main shared goals or values is to efficiency, get somebody through the process as quickly as possible. So remove delays, make the process as streamlined as possible, and avoid trial. Not at all costs, but that's sort of like the last resort. Because as you're going to learn in this class, our courtrooms are overloaded with cases, right? And that there's a sense of these people work in the courtroom every day, right? The prosecutor, the judge, the defense attorney, they see each other every day, right? And so they know how large their court docket is, and they really want to sort of get things through as smoothly as possible. Like any other workplace, right? You want to get things done. And so that becomes sort of a shared goal within the courtroom work group. There are features of the work group that sort of facilitate this goal. The members of the work group have a lot in common. They actually have more in common with each other than they do, particularly with the defense attorneys, with the people that they are representing. And so judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, they all went to law school. They're all professionals. If you live in Wisconsin, it's very likely that you went to law school with the people that you're working with in the courtroom. Prosecutors oftentimes become judges. So judges sort of know what it's like to be a prosecutor. They sort of share the same experiences. And like any group, that if you see each other really frequently, you're going to get to know each other, know your personalities. And so that kind of, in a way, applies pressure to make sure that everybody's like a team player, trying to achieve those goals of efficiency, streamlining the process, and avoiding trial. And so they share certain assumptions, and whether you like it or not, oftentimes the shared assumption among prosecutors and defense attorneys is that the individual who's in the courtroom is most likely guilty, okay? That doesn't mean that they're both not going to do their job, right? But you've been in the game long enough, and there's a lot of guilty. The reason you're there and the reason you were charged is because there's a high probable cause that you committed a crime and that you're likely guilty of that crime. And so they share certain assumptions there, right? And also the assumptions that trial should be of last resort because it is so time consuming and costly for the taxpayers. And so there's kind of a sense that you only really want to go to trial when there's a real like confidence level that the prosecutor or the defense attorney has that their client is in fact innocent. The defense attorney might really encourage their client to take a plea agreement if they really feel like the evidence is making it very, very difficult for them to be acquitted. And there's a hierarchy of shared norms. If you are a new defense attorney or a new prosecutor, if you're a new prosecutor, you've got a boss, right? And so you could be an assistant district attorney. There's going to be a boss ahead of you, the district attorney, that's going to like encourage you to, avoid delays and avoid trial. And if you're not doing it, then, you might not advance within those ranks. There's also going to be shared norms with defense attorneys that if they are just not playing along with the shared norms and values, then their life is going to be harder day in and day out. There can definitely be some benefits of the courtroom work group. I mean, one benefit is that caseload is huge. Court activities cost a lot of money. People who are indigent don't have money, that oftentimes those court fees are ever not paid or paid by the taxpayer. So, if you can avoid trial, if you can get things through as quickly as possible, that there is a benefit of that. Also, you can sort of save your resources for the most serious cases. But there's definitely some drawbacks as well. If you have, there's something to be said about the adversarial system. Defendants shouldn't feel pressured to plead out, that they should feel confident that even if it's a minor case, that they deserve their day in court. And so the drawbacks are that the courtroom work group, with the assumptions that somebody is guilty, the efforts to sort of push people along and accept plea agreements, that can really bypass the rights of the accused. And those rights of the accused are in our Bill of Rights in the 4th through 8th Amendments for a darn good reason, right? And so you don't want the courtroom work group to sort of violate those rights. So the courtroom work group, it contributes to the funneling in the criminal justice system. But so does this other thing called the criminal justice wedding cake. And on the side here, you see this delicious cake right here. It's around dinner time, so I'm really hungry. And so that cake looks really good to me. And one of the things you notice when you're looking at like a wedding cake, which is different from another cake, is that a wedding cake has these different tiers, these different levels. Now, those aren't tiers like, oh, I'm so sad I'm getting married, I made the wrong choice. Not those kind of tiers, but TIER, levels, okay? And so the criminal justice wedding cake has different levels within it. And so tier 1, the tier that's at the very top, is what is known as celebrated cases. That is cases that are deal with a celebrity. And so a good example of that would be the O.J. Simpson case, or the Martha Stewart case, or more recently the Harvey Weinstein case, where he was charged and tried for sexual assault. Those kinds of cases get the most attention from the criminal justice system. That's why it's at the top, but it's also small tier because there aren't a lot of celebrated cases. The second case there, and I'm just going to put all of these up so we can look at them individually, and I can put my laser pointer back on. The second tier is serious felonies. Again, there are less serious felonies than celebrated cases, but it's still a significant number. And they get the second most attention from the criminal justice system. The third tier, less serious felonies. Fourth tier, misdemeanors, which many charges for misdemeanors, okay? And so the thinking here is that the criminal justice system spends the most time on the top tiers, okay? And it makes sense. At least for serious felonies, you think that those are the kinds of crimes that are most likely to hurt people that live in our country, in our communities. And so, of course, you want the criminal justice system to spend more time on homicides, aggravated assaults, aggravated robberies, aggravated sexual assaults, right? Those are the things you want the criminal justice system to spend a lot of time on and be more or less likely to plead out or, and maybe even go to trial. With celebrity cases, you might be wondering, like, why so much attention? Well, it could simply be that you want to, send a cautionary tale, right? Think about Martha Stewart, right? That she's a celebrity. It got a lot of attention, and she got in trouble for insider trading. And it might be sending a message to others that doesn't matter who you are, but if you're thinking about insider trading, look what happened to Martha Stewart, and everybody was paying attention to what happened to Martha Stewart. It can also send a message to our society that no one's above the law, right? That everyone, regardless of whether you're a celebrity or rich, that you're going to get treated, get serious attention from the criminal justice system. That might be more of an illusion than a reality, but it could be a point of why attention is paid to that. So your textbook talks about some of the benefits that are associated with the criminal justice wedding cake. One is that there is consensus and parity that if you're in tier 2 serious felony, you're more likely to get the same treatment as anybody else who has committed a serious felony. And there's also consensus among the courtroom work group that that's the kind of that we should pay more attention to that. Likewise, also with misdemeanors, there's a consensus within the courtroom work group to not spend as much time on those. The downsides are that cases that garner a lot of media coverage receive different treatment, okay? And so, yes, it could be a celebrity, but is it really fair to Martha Stewart that she got a stiffer penalty than a lot of people who do economic insider trading and those sorts of things, okay? So you could see that there might be a reason why you'd want to spend a lot of time on a celebrity. It sends sort of like a message to others. But at the end of the day, that individual celebrity might be treated in a more harsh fashion than somebody else. But maybe that's not that big of a deal, just something to sort of think about. Okay, so thanks for listening to these 2 lectures. Looking forward to next week. We are going to be doing the second half of Chapter 1. We're going to be looking at the 6 criminal justice perspectives: crime control, rehabilitation, non-interventionist, etc. And then you're going to get assigned one of those perspectives, of the criminal justice perspectives. And then there's an activity that we're going to be involved in our online discussion. All right. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.